to the BOT IRR, the BOT law, and also will manage the contract compliance functions for the PPP Center. Likewise, the usual administrative services, which provides administrative support for all the departments. What is also new for the new PPP Center is that there will now be a legal services department which will provide legal advice not only for the PPP Center and its day-to-day activity, but as well as provide legal advice to the legal consultants, to the implementing agencies. Aside from this, through our technical assistance grant from ADB, OSAID, and CIDA, the Canadian International Development Agency, we will be able to hire national consultants, which will be paid for under this technical assistance. And these national consultants will cover areas in terms of legal, financial, and technical expertise. And these national consultants hired through the technical assistance package of our developmental partners will be there for us to tap for our operational support. The projected contribution to the economy, it's infrastructure development. We're going to roll out, we plan to roll out about 10 PPP projects this year, 5 for the first half of the year, and the balance for the remainder of the year. We've already rolled out one, which is the operation and maintenance contract for LRT1 and MRT3. In June, you will see 2 other PPP projects in the road sector, which will be the invitation to bid will be published in June, and this will be for the Anghari and for the NAIA Expressway, and another one sometime in July for the unsolicited proposal on the NLEX-XLEX connector, and the balance for the balance of the year. For 2012, though you only see tollways and railway projects, for 2012 we are also going to implement PPP projects for the health sector, the education sector, the agriculture sector, and the tourism sector. So the PPP projects for the social sector will be implemented in 2012. The 2011 projects, the total project cost is around $3 billion. And so we foresee that there's a mobilization of private capital in terms of equity and as well as in terms of lending, financing, which will we're sure that will be catalyst for GDP growth through increased economic activity, enhanced job creation, as well as increased investor confidence. These are the PPP projects for rollout in 2011. Like I said, the 5 that will be rolled out sometime within the first half, we will be announcing pretty soon, and we know that the investors as well as the lending institutions are waiting for all of these projects to be implemented, and the only reason that there's a little bit of we are still on track, but we just want to make sure that when we come out with a PPP project for bidding, that it's well structured, it's well planned, and the proper risk allocations have been made, and that if there is a need for government subsidy, like a viability gap financing, we want to make sure that we have thoroughly studied them and that they have been properly deliberated and discussed. instead of describing the different PPP projects for rollout in 2011, I would like to just present to you an audiovisual presentation for this 2011 project, so that you don't have to listen to me. I think it would be better for you to see them by way of animation for you to be able to understand them more. If there are any questions regarding these projects later on, please feel free to come up and ask them from me or my staff, Director Rina Alzate.
Between the government and private sector paves the way for delivery of public infrastructure and or public services. Through PPP, the private sector offers efficiency gain.
Okay, we'll reset. We'll reset.
The Public-Private Partnerships, or PPP, a contractual agreement between the government and private sector, paves the way for delivery of public infrastructure and or public services. Through PPP, the private sector offers efficiency gains and helps accelerate the provision of public services. Through PPP, the government's role can be rationalized. For 2011,
it's not our fault, actually.
Well, perhaps we could load it on the website later and view it. Can we, do you think?
Well, if you want to take a look at it, it's loaded in our website, actually. But I just wanted to present it to you so that, I don't have to describe it to you. Hopefully it plays, and I guess the
Public-Private Partnerships, or PPP, a contractual agreement between the government and private sector, paves the way for delivery of public infrastructure and or public services. Through PPP, the private sector offers efficiency gains and helps accelerate the provision of public services. Through PPP, the government's role can be rationalized. For 2011, the government is rolling out.
Okay, let's turn that off, guys. Okay, I'll thank you very much to Vic Torio. So we'll have a lot of time for introductions and personal conversations later, because there's a lot of people who want to meet Phil. So really a pleasure, Phil.
Thank you as well. And thank you for being such a good audience. And we'd just like to apologize for not being able to show the audiovisual presentation. If you want to view it, you can view it at our website. And I guess that's the reason why we're here, because we want to improve the infrastructure. And maybe we can also provide some help with the Tower Club. Thank you very much.
Very good. And I'll now call upon Vic Stars, the partner of KPMG here, to introduce our next speaker, who seems like a dynamic type, as is Vic.
Thank you, Richard. Must be the oncoming storm, Phil. I'm glad to see that we have a full house despite the oncoming storm. It's been changing. It was supposed to come today, but now I think this morning it was supposed to come Saturday. Before I introduce the next speaker, allow me to just give a few acknowledgments in less than a minute, I assure you. We get a lot of support from Asia Pacific region, and some of them are here. The global chair in the communications and media sector, ASPAC head of markets, Sean Collins, is here. Good, Sean. We have two directors for ASPAC markets, Sharon Smith, Sharon, and Deborah Glenway. They're both here. Welcome to Manila. And of course, Bert has been acknowledged, but still, Bert Manabat and Noel. Noel was here. He left. The next speaker is Sharad Sumani. We have KPMG has a very strong credentials in PPP and infrastructure, and this is one of our go-to guys in PPP and infrastructure, and an expert, if you will. Sharad is an executive director of the Global Infrastructure and Projects Group based in Singapore. He took up his Bachelor of Engineering in Nagpur, India. Took up his Master in Management Studies in Finance in Mumbai. Sharad has over 15 years of experience in infrastructure, mainly in energy, transportation, and urban infrastructure. Specializes in project finance. This is a rather long list, so I'll just mention about 3 of his projects that he did. He was the project director of the team which consisted of advising the Public Utilities Board of Changi New Water in project in Singapore. Also advised the Singaporean government for the PPP framework of the next generation national broadband network, and also advised the National Environment Agency on the proposed PPP model for PCRS in Marina Bay. So, with those credentials, may I introduce Sharad Somani? Sharad?
Thank you, Vic, for the kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. I must admit I'm truly amazed with the turnout this morning. And I was informed that this is a regular forum which happens to discuss key issues facing the business world. I'm sure this is something which other countries in the region could definitely learn from to get the business community on the same forum. So it's quite amazing. Truly an honor to be here. Many thanks for coming and looking forward to listening to PPP. I'm sure this is a healthy dose of PPP this morning, together with the breakfast that we're having. I am told that I have enough time, so I can go on as long as I want. So thank you for that. But I will limit it to hopefully 20 minutes. I've got 20 slides. I'll focus on the key issues that I see based on my experience on PPPs in the region. And then I'll talk a little bit about Philippines PPP market. So if you can go to the next slide, what I would like to do is quickly first summarize what Phil stated as what is happening in the PPP space in Philippines. And then just if we can, we'll talk about the value proposition of PPP for both private sector and public sector. We'll talk about the key structuring issues that are currently involved in PPPs. All of us know that PPP is complex, PPP is time consuming. Let's look at why it is so. We'll also look at a couple of best practices through examples, and we'll look at the important role that the multilaterals can play in this region to make PPPs happen. And finally, we'll summarize with key imperatives for success for PPP. So looking quickly at PPPs in Philippines, I think most of this has been extremely well covered by Phil. I just thought I'll summarize what were the key messages. I think clearly this government is committed to make PPPs happen in the country, and that is exemplified by the fact that there are a list of 10 priority projects which have been identified. I like when the government says there are 5 or 10 priority projects that we want to happen instead of 100 projects that we want to do, and at the end of the year nothing happens. So I think this focus is very critical, and I must congratulate the PPP Center for that. I was also quite impressed that the BOT law in Philippines is probably one of the oldest in the region, and it's the most comprehensive law. It was done in 1993, and I took the liberty to pick up a few statements from that. If you go to the next slide, Essentially, it's quite amazing that in 1993, government recognized and said that private sector can play an indispensable role and can be the main engine of national growth. So it is acknowledged quite early on that it will play an important role in the infrastructure sector in Philippines. And also, it's quite forward-looking, I must say, to say that not only the financial incentives, but the government will take all the necessary steps to facilitate private sector participation in Philippines infrastructure market. So I think that's extremely forward-looking statement that has been made upfront way back in 1993. Phil talked about the sectors of focus. I must say this is the most comprehensive list of infrastructure sectors that I've looked at in any law, and it's very, very comprehensive. But what is good to note also is the multiple types of PPP that are being recognized. And this is the current, while the list was restricted, I'm encouraged by the fact that certain more types of PPPs like joint ventures are also being included as part of the listing. So again, without dwelling too much on this slide, but I think just to summarize, there are a few concrete things which are happening in the Philippines infrastructure PPP space. PPP Center is a good example of having a focused agency which will drive other agencies to think about PPP and structure projects for PPPs. The enhanced PPP framework, the new legislation hopefully will act as the right impetus to help make a slew of PPP projects in the country. I think making the funding available, I think 300 million Filipino pesos was a good step, and I am told that it's going to be further strengthened by tapping on some more multilaterals. And that is going to be critical, and we'll discuss a little bit more about why it's so critical in the PPPs market. I think the infrastructure fund, there's something which we are working on as well, and that will act as a critical enabler to potentially help PPPs become commercially viable and bankable. So let's move on to value proposition for public and private sector. It's important that there is something in it for both public and private sector. In fact, I was in an ADB conference last 2 days, and somebody described PPP as a marriage between two equal willing parties. And for it to be sustainable for 20, 30 years, it's critical that both parties look at each other as equals and they respect each other in terms of their capabilities to deliver. And that's where the concept of risk sharing comes in, which we'll talk as well. So what are the benefits to the government? I mean, a lot of people have been using PPP as a service delivery mechanism in various countries. Essentially, the key value proposition has been that it does offer a better value for money, which essentially means that over the life of the project, a project implemented on a PPP basis will be much more valuable in terms of service delivery than a traditional procurement by the government. Fixed price contract knows value, so unlike a traditional procurement which leads to potentially some cost and time overruns, PPPs are generally seen to be on time, on budget, and hence quite a lot of certainty is what they offer to the government and the people who benefit from the service. It does help lower upfront government debt although on the longer term basis, government does have to make service payments. One of the key features which I like about PPPs is no service, no payment. The payments are linked to the service delivery, and this to any government is the most critical aspect. If people can see service happening, then there's that much acceptability to make the payments, and that's something which is very important. Of course, there are a whole lot of pitfalls which have been pointed by various people, including things like less flexible. You tie yourselves up to a 20-30 year contract, and it sometimes kind of worries the government that we don't know what's going to happen 5 years down the line. How can we commit ourselves for next 30 years? And that's something which has to be properly addressed in the contract in terms of change variation clauses. Run complex and costly tendering processes, and that's where I guess the PPP Center could play a very important role in terms of telling what is the mechanism of implementing PPPs, how the process has to be run, and which was explained by Phil. And also, if we can take it one step forward, what are the standard contracts and what are the kind of standard risks risk mitigation mechanisms or risk sharing mechanisms which need to be incorporated in the contract. If you can standardize some of these, I think the process can be made less time consuming, and we'll see it in a case study going forward. End of the day, government still remains the ultimate bearer of risk. What essentially it means is, if the service doesn't happen, the government is answerable to the public. So it's important that that responsibility doesn't go away from the government, and that sometimes is criticized as a weakness of PPP, but that still can be addressed through contracts. Did we miss slide? Sorry, the private sector. Okay, there are a whole lot of advantages for private sector, and one of the biggest advantages, as I see, is it opens up a whole new line of business for the private sector, which is not only one time but continuing for a longer period. So you get a 30-year life contract for the private sector. It also offers an opportunity to diversify. So there's a traditional procurement and there's a PPP, and this in a way kind of makes a good portfolio mix for private sector. Obviously, there are a whole lot of concerns that the private sector has, and that's where the challenge for the government is to address those concerns. It's essentially upsides are limited. We had the Maynilad Water CEO speaking a day before, and he says that the regulator looks at what are the allowed costs and how much return is to be given based on the weighted average cost of capital. So PPPs are not a source of huge profits for private sector. The private sector is constantly under scrutiny by the government and the regulators to ensure that the returns are justified and not too high. They obviously are called upon to manage much more risk. It's no longer a question of just constructing a project and walking off. It's constructing and managing that project for the next 20 to 30 years. And also, and this is something which we must keep in mind when we structure the tendering process. For a private sector, it's an extremely expensive process to participate in a PPP project. Come out with the tender documents, when they come out with the short list, and when they go through the negotiation process. If you go to the next slide, there are multiple PPP models, and loosely any project where public and private sector comes together can be called as a PPP. So joint venture is a PPP, and I'm heartened to know that it is being included as part of the BOT, the PPP law in Philippines. Essentially, as you move from left to right, the idea is there is increasing role of private sector, and private sector takes more and more risks as you go from, say, DBO to BOO, and potentially leading up to entire privatization of the assets. So if you go to the next slide, I think this slide, the next one. So you can just keep pressing it for the complete slide. Yeah, let the complete. Sorry about that animation. Okay, so this is an important concept to understand for all of us, which is different from the traditional procurement. Is to essentially say that PPP is a project finance based concept where you have to create a special purpose vehicle which signs the concession agreement with the authority that's giving the concession, the agency. Now the only objective in life of this SPV is to take whatever risks it has been given on the concession contract to share those risks with all the agencies that are involved around it. And essentially, if you tap it a couple of more times, Richard, sorry for that. Thanks. There are multiple risks: the construction risk, the financing risk, the operating risk. All these risks, the SPV's objective is to diversify, bypass it, or share it with the contracting parties. Now, one of the things that you will notice is for a project to be bankable, it's important that all the risks are taken out of this SPV company. And as we all know, the banks like to see a project which does not have any risk. Banks by nature are extremely conservative, except when they went bullish on the CDOs a couple of years back. I think they like to be very boring and conservative, so they essentially don't appreciate any risk. And that's what we need to offer in terms of a well-structured project which has minimal risks in the SPV, and most of the risks are taken care by strong stakeholders who support the company. If you go on to the next slide, so what are the key structuring issues? I mean, one of the key things is the utilization risk or the demand risk. Now, this is something which many a times private sector cannot have a handle on. Now, whether it's utilization of a toll road, the water project, the power offtake, private sector has inherent disability to take on the demand risk. It was interesting, one of our PPP partners was working in UK some time back, and he was called by the government to structure a PPP for prisons. And he says, why don't you take the demand risk for prisons? And what he said is, I'm willing to take the demand risk of prisons as long as you give me the rights, the sentencing rights, so that I can fill up the prisons. And I guess the message here is, you cannot pass on risks which private sector has no control on. And that's something which is very important for the government agencies to understand. Because when I talk to various governments in the region, they always say, if we are doing PPP, everything has to be done by the private sector. Why should I take any risk? And the important message, as I said when starting, is it's a partnership, which essentially means you got to put onto the table what each party is best capable of doing. So it's not risk, it's transfer, it's risk sharing, which is the critical message for PPPs. The second is payment mechanism, and I think this is the most critical aspect of a concession agreement. It's very, very critical that the payments are structured in a fashion which incentivizes the right behavior from the private sector. So we will have service fee payments. So if you are delivering service, if the service is available, you'll get paid. If there are certain deficiencies,